Increasingly, I think it will take longer than a lot of Bitcoiners expect. Hyperbitcoinization itself, it is a great meme. I think it might be a little bit misleading in terms of what it suggests. The unwinding of the maleffects of fiat, I think, is a better framing in some way. Fiat ruins everything. You are far less likely to want to have kids. For architecture, there is some hideously ugly building. And then as little as 20 or 30 years later, it's just abandoned. What I'm describing, people would call capitalism. It's really unfortunate Bitcoin could potentially enable that you start to unwind that whole thing. At the end of all of this, you're not such a communist anymore. There's no need for politics if people are just cooperating. If you're structurally unable to think about the long term, you become selfish and desperate. Politics starts to look a lot more appealing. Your decision making will be wildly different based on your time frame. Archie.
Alan Farrington, part 2. Good morning.
Good morning.
So we're in Lugano.
Just to clarify, I was wondering about this. We are admitting that this is part 2. You're not going to seamlessly edit it and then all of a sudden we're wearing different clothes.
It's actually...
I was thinking if I should ask you if I should just wear the same clothes.
No. We're not going to do that. We will post it separately as part 2 because we were having such a good conversation last time. We kind of ran out of time. We wanted to be respectful of your time as well. But we were sort of in the middle of a discussion and the question just popped up in my mind, and I don't think I framed it fairly. When I say fairly, I mean, like, I don't think it was fair to Bitcoin, because what I said was, okay, let's assume that, overnight we're on a Bitcoin standard, and I'm like, how do we unwind everything that's happened in the last 40 years? And I think framing it with those circumstances is really quite unfair, because the symptoms of money printing have accumulated over a long time, and society has kind of adjusted in a way accordingly. And many of the manifestations of that malpolicy have taken time to weave its way through society. And so I guess it's only fair to then ask the question about how that would be unwound over a similar sort of time span, and say, okay, well, let's assume that we are 15 years into a 40-year period of hyper-Bitcoinization, the adoption phase. How do you see the unwinding of the symptoms that we see of, the Cantillion Affect, the money printer?
I hesitate to be too specific in trying to give an answer to this, more on the point of the timeline, because I feel like I have quite a clear picture of what will happen. I just have no idea when. So maybe it's kind of split the question that way. We can come back to when if you really want to push me on it.
We can just talk in general sort of chronology of what you think will happen first, rather than at specific time points.
There's one thing I can say that maybe is still interesting without being just avoiding the question or anything, that I think it will just take longer than a lot of Bitcoiners expect, and that a lot of the kind of Bitcoin memes suggest. I mean, maybe even, hyper-Bitcoinization itself, while a very, it is a great meme, I think it might be a little bit misleading in terms of what it suggests. I basically don't think it'll be fast. I don't think there'll be, there'll be like a period of transition in which everything is like normies notice that things are starting to change. And I think actually the way you set up the question is very helpful, because usually I would probably struggle to articulate this because there's almost nothing to compare it to that anyone has any experience of. But the unwinding of the maleffects of fiat, I think, is a better framing in some way, maybe a more accurate way to actually expect, to prepare for what we're likely to experience, rather than even focusing on Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin will do X, Bitcoin will do Y. We touched on this last time. I've said this a whole bunch of times in different, whether it's podcast appearances or writing or whatever, that Bitcoin is there's lots of ways in which it's new, and obviously that's great and people find that interesting and it hooks a lot of people in. But to me, at least, what's most interesting about it is something very, very old, and it's like the blip of fiat that's weird, and we're just yanking that out and going back to what we had for all of civilizational history prior. So with that perspective, just imagining or trying to think through how fiat unwinds, I think is, I don't want to say more valuable. I don't know. It makes more sense to me, right? It's how I would choose to think about these things. Not that other people need to agree with that necessarily, but it just makes a lot more sense to me. So,
looking for a secure, trusted way to buy, sell, and hold Bitcoin? Gemini has been leading the way since 2014. Founded by the Winklevoss twins to be a security-first, fully regulated Bitcoin platform. With Gemini, your Bitcoin is protected with enterprise-grade security, backed by insurance and Type 2 certifications for SOC 1 and SOC 2. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or a long-time hodler, Gemini gives you the tools to stack sats and build generational wealth your way. From simple one-tap buys to advanced charts and trading features, it's all here. Buy, sell, and hold securely. That's Gemini. Gemini. Bitcoin with confidence. Need cash without selling your Bitcoin? With DeBiFi, you borrow against your Bitcoin, non-custodial, multi-sig escrow, and you keep your keys. No banks, no selling. Just institutional grade liquidity with terms up to 2 years and APRs as low as 9%. All transactions are signed using private keys on your own device. Using a 3 of 4 multi-sig setup, 3 out of 4 keys must approve every transaction, giving you control, transparency, and peace of mind. Whether you're a hodler, miner, small business, or treasury team, DeBiFi gives you the cash you need now without giving up your Bitcoin upside or triggering a taxable event. Get liquidity, keep exposure, and stay secure. That's DeBiFi. DeBiFi, your Bitcoin, your money.
Maybe picking up on some of the threads that we left at the end of part 1. I don't know if there's quite a lot of things we touch on. I don't know if you had anything particular in mind as like, what's your favorite fiat mal effect? And then I
think savings is the first
savings.
Thing. So the most immediate effect of Bitcoin on people who participate in Bitcoin is that their savings are going to, because we're quite early in the adoption phase, they're going to accumulate wealth at a faster rate than they would otherwise have the opportunity to do. Yeah. And so I think they are the most immediate effects that we will see. And so what happens when people find themselves in resource abundance? I think the propensity to couple up, start families is probably the first thing. That's
interesting. I'm not sure I even would have gone in that direction, but I completely agree. That would be a very positive one. Last time we spent a lot of time talking about housing, but we could easily have thrown in fertility, right? I'm a little bit, I wouldn't push that one as hard because I think it's a more complex problem. It's kind of obviously more social and political as well, whereas housing, in my mind at least, is very clear. It's just housing is monetized. There's no debate around this. But I think it probably is relevant to coupling up, to having kids.
Finances are. I mean, I've heard Elon Musk say,
oh, he loves this,
he hates it, I guess. He can't help but have children. It's quite incredible. He's on quite a streak. I think it's number 12 at the moment, right? Something like that. Anyway,
that sounds about right. Yeah.
But he's like, oh no. When he is addressing the reasons why, and people say, well, we can't afford to. He's like, yeah, but people have been poor all along, and people are poor all around the world, and they're still having children. And like, yeah, but people don't want to become impoverished as a choice of having more children. They don't want. They want to maintain a standard of living that they're
I think
accustomed to.
A really sad thing is, Musk may have said this. I'm sure other people have said this too. I don't think this is all that original, but the relationship between your wealth and the number of kids you're likely to have, I guess, not at the level of an individual, but in aggregate, which is obviously what matters in the long run. I don't think it's at all, the wealthier you are, you have more kids. I think that's kind of obviously nonsense if you just look around the world, but it probably is something like it's linked to the rate of change of your wealth, right? So if you're super well off relative to whatever else, some other country, let's say, but if you're slowly getting poorer, then that strikes me as you are far less likely to want to have kids. And then maybe the inverse is actually quite a good comparison, in that if you're in relative terms way poorer, but you're slowly getting richer, maybe even not getting richer at all, but just not getting poorer is maybe more the point. And I think that touches on things that we did talk about last time, just around the, I forget exactly how I put it, but the behavioral effects of being unable to save. That, I mean, think of it this way, right? This is I don't think remotely controversial, that having kids is a very long-termist project, right? Or I mean, it should be if you do it well, right? If you're serious about it, let's say, maybe Musk isn't the best example of like how you ought to go about it. But if because of fiat, or in very large part because of fiat, you're incapable, like quite literally incapable of thinking long-term, and you're forced to be short-termist and forced to be selfish and forced to be antisocial. That's another good way of putting it too. I would argue having kids and raising them well, maybe so as to, again, distinguish from Musk's approach, that is a very pro-social thing to do. Like we have to have kids. We have to have a 2.1 fertility rate to continue to exist as a society. And so raising kids well is obviously a pro-social thing to do, but it's an extremely long-term commitment, and you need to be able to think long-term to do it. So yeah, I actually, thank you for bringing that up. I probably wouldn't have thought of that, but that's a great example.
The other thing is, I guess, from a cultural point of view, there are many people within Bitcoin who seem to think that with a better money standard, that we would produce works of art and culture, architecture, performance art, whatever, of a different standard. Perhaps they would want to assert that it would be of a higher standard. And often, you know, I'm not a cultural critic, I'm not an art critic either, but often they cite sort of classical works and think that we're just going to revert back to that. And I think that's kind of missing something. But what do you think the effect would be on culture from an art point of view?
I probably have the least strong and well thought through opinions on this, you know, relative to other potential answers to like, why is Bitcoinization good? What will change, etc. I'm very sympathetic to these arguments. I think, as probably everybody is on kind of some instinctive level, because they just look at modern architecture and modern art and whatever else, and it's horrendous, and you kind of quickly make the link to you know, just using fiat as an insult to describe it. I think the reason I hesitate a little bit though is it's nowhere near as clear to me. Like housing, again, is a great example. Maybe even, you know, fertility, as we just talked about, is a lot clearer in my mind. But with art, it's not at all clear to me what the mechanism is by which fiat corrupts this. I'm totally open to the idea that fiat has corrupted it, but that, again, is kind of where we're joking about a little bit in part one, that's like my whole shtick, right? Like fiat ruins everything, and here we are. We need to try to figure out how to undo that. I mean, I could venture a guess to the effect that, you know, the incentives are, I mean, that's kind of at the root of everything with fiat, right? It just corrupts your incentives. And so the incentives in fiat art, fiat architecture are, maybe even without needing to know exactly what they are, it's just they're not as pure as perhaps they once were, and they're not, you know, the instinct and the drive to create and the process by which the creation of whatever it is managed and financed ultimately as well, doesn't come from, you know, a true surplus of wealth and the desire to channel that creatively. It's like, it's something else. It's corrupted. Well, actually, there is one thing I have thought about this a little bit more. So for architecture specifically, I think I do have a clearer idea of the mechanism by which it's corrupted. So that might be interesting to go into in a little bit, which is that for most of civilized history, I guess, for most of the history for which there was such a thing as architecture, the owners of the real estate in question would be local, effectively, right? They would be someone known to that community because they lived there and they were probably quite wealthy in order to be in that position in the first place. And in many cases, this will depend on the timeline, I guess, and will vary from this. This is a very high level generalization, right? But in the more recent past, so say the I guess past 200 years or so, then maybe this kind of this starts to dwindle with fiat. Not only would they be wealthy, but they'd be wealthy as a result of their entrepreneurial activity, right? You start to see basically post-industrial revolution, there's quite a shift in source of wealth away from just, effectively being in the aristocracy and having been born into it, versus opportunities to really create wealth and accumulate capital. And that setup, I think, is ideal for, I don't know if there is any precise terminology for this, but I guess Bitcoiners would probably call it something like, architecture on the gold standard, right? That it really was coming from excess wealth, not necessarily looking to optimize returns. So not just wasting money either, but the primary goal wasn't how do we make as much money as possible from this? It's how do we make where I live beautiful? Given, we need this stuff anyway, right? We need real estate. We need what then leads to architecture, but I live here and I want it to be a nice place. And maybe even more cynically, like I want people to like me for having made it a nice place. So you make it a nice place. Nowadays, and I think for quite a long time, the incentives are so completely different from this. And it's not like, I'm a little wary of their kind of inferring a conspiracy of sorts of like, oh, they want to make things ugly.
Look what they took from you.
Yeah, exactly. It's more, I don't, there's this great, I'm sure that most of your audience will be aware of this, George Carlin line that seems like it's applicable to basically everything, but you don't need conspiracy when incentives are aligned, right? I don't think that's actually word for word what the quote is, but anyway, that is the point of the quote. And I think it absolutely applies here in that there's no ugly buildings commission, right? But what I do think is hugely important is that the vast majority of modern architecture is owned and financed by people who have no connection whatsoever to where the building is, will never go there, don't know anybody there, aren't known by anybody there. I mean, even the mechanism in terms of how many intermediaries and the extent of the like securitization effectively makes this kind of pointless. It's not even a like for like comparison. It's not like, it used to be your local industrialist and now it's some like foreign industrialist. It's, there could be, if you live in a building in like London, say, that's relatively new, the actual owners, like the ultimate beneficial owners of that building are probably tens of thousands of pension beneficiaries in tens of countries with however many asset management and investment bank and consulting and whatever intermediaries in between. And again, it's not that these people want this building to be ugly. It's that they just have no reason to care whatsoever. And then obviously like that in and of itself, you might think maybe isn't even that bad. It's just like that could be efficiency in financing the project, right? But there's still some consideration of making it beautiful. But I think the final, like what tears out any residual instinct towards beauty that might have snuck through all of this is its monetization, right? You're not even, like, never mind beauty, you're not even really doing it for the sake of infrastructure or housing. You're doing it to save.
And we see that quite a lot, especially, for example, I live in, I guess I can say central London without being too specific.
Yeah.
I live in central London, and there are quite a lot of new towers, apartment towers, being built, and student accommodation as well. So like very wealthy families who send their kids over, and they're not too concerned. The builders of these complexes are not too concerned, or they're not concerned at all about the beauty or the longevity of the building and repurposing as time goes on.
I'd push even a little bit further than that. I think this is the thing, what I'm about to mention is what really, really irks people. It's not just that these buildings are ugly, it's that they have no local character at all. So I have no idea where you're talking about, but it almost doesn't matter. If you showed me a picture of this building and there wasn't any landmark in the background, nobody could tell you where it is. It could be anywhere in the world.
Yeah. And they've got this they've all got this kind of uniform ugliness where they've got these really small windows.
Yeah.
This ridiculous industrial
that's
style
probably
cladding.
some like environmental safety standard bullshit, which is like yet another fiat thing. So sure.
I don't know. Like I can't put it down to that. I think so. Like when I was coming of age, so I'm from Melbourne in Australia, and the state of Victoria, and probably the whole country at that time in the 90s, had a severe recession, the likes of which I've not seen since. And as a result, there were a whole bunch of reforms throughout the country. And the guiding principle was economic rationalism. I don't know if that's a globally recognized term, but it was a term.
Familiar.
It's
Sounds
basically
creepy, though.
It's basically like, does this make sense financially? We've all done feasibility studies, right? So basically, it's just putting the primacy of financial return and financial accountability, which is fair enough. Every organization, society needs that. We could do with a lot more of that at the moment. But that guiding principle basically meant that, if it makes sense financially, you do that. So you're supposed to maximize not just shareholder returns, but, your revenue. And so I think a lot of these types of buildings that I've described, they're built primarily and perhaps solely with return per square foot in mind.
Yeah.
And without any kind of regard for, they employ an architect who has to do what they're told rather than to build a legacy and whatever.
Well, so even this is interesting. You can nitpick this a little as well, in that I agree with you that it's not a bad instinct to have, to basically be efficient,
it's
right?
a good sound principle to incorporate.
But you get, this is a really interesting part. You'll get a really different answer, and like an increasingly different answer as to what actually meets that standard, depending on your time preference, basically, like the time frame that is relevant to your investment. So if you're investing over a very, very short period of time, which is, we covered last time, is like, this is what fiat makes you do, then you get the kind of things that you're talking about, the kind of extremely ugly, placeless buildings, without recognizing that, for example, in 50 years, this is so ugly that no one's going to want to use it for anything, and you're going to have to knock it down and build something new, right? If you're, just for the sake of argument, this is a little bit unrealistic, but like, to make the point, if your attitude is, I'm investing over centuries, right? Which is kind of, no one really talks about that in like financial terms of like a return that actually goes for hundreds of years, but it is a reasonable characterization of the, call it, gold standard attitude to architecture that I described, where again, you're not trying to lose money, but optimizing for profit right now is not the point. Building something beautiful and that contributes to where you live and yada, 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 right? If that's your attitude, then you could financially model it if you want to, but the point is that you almost don't really need to, because you're obviously going to build something that will be used for centuries, because if it's beautiful, people will want to keep using it beyond its purpose right now when we're building it. And this is like, I mean, I'm sure you can comment on this for London. I live in Edinburgh, which is actually quite, it's managed to escape this mostly, not entirely, but it's amazingly well preserved. It's a really beautiful place to live. And actually a lot of even the new architecture is somewhat mindful of this, which is nice. But even there's obviously counter examples, because there's, nowhere has really escaped fiat. But like London would be a great example. I'm sure you can think of places like this where there is some hideously ugly building that, it has whatever its purpose is when it was built. Maybe it's student accommodation, maybe it's like some company office, whatever. And then as little as 20 or 30 years later, it's just abandoned. Like, no one wants to use it for anything after its initial purpose. And that contrast is really interesting, because 30 years is an eternity in, the careers even of like people involved in financial markets, never mind the, their kind of quarterly revenue predictions and whatever else, like very quarterly news flow. 30 years is just unfathomable. But in the life of a building or a city,
yeah, it's a blink of
like
an eye.
Nothing at all. Yeah. And so like Edinburgh's actually maybe not a good example, because it is so well preserved, but London has buildings that are centuries old that will always be used for something, right? Who knows how many different things they have been used for in their existence, but people want to keep using them because they're beautiful. Whereas newer buildings are almost, not entirely, but almost universally ugly. And so as soon as their first use expires, nobody really knows what to do anymore.
So beauty is almost a sort of not a conservative, but a conservation principle.
You could
is often not considered in any kind of feasibility.
So I completely agree with this, but I was driving in a different point, which is that you don't need to step outside of, so I forget what the expression was in Australia, but like financial rationality or something like that. Yeah. It's even completely within the realms of financial rationality. Your decision making will be wildly different based on your time frame, right? So actually, for the original owners, I guess, or original builders of the now centuries old beautiful buildings in London, they're getting a dramatically better return than if they'd built something ugly. But if you only care about, quarters, years, never mind 20 years, which isn't very long in the scheme of what we're talking about, then yeah, you go for the ugly one.
Property developers call that overcapitalization. They've got a term where it's like,
oh, really?
It's like they say, well, what is, for example, they'll start with what is the potential revenue generation capacity of a building of X square feet, and then you work your way back from there based on what does it cost me to get that return, right? To generate that return. And if you invest in something that's going to give your building longer term, I guess, staying power, regenerative power, and make it attractive for potential tenants, it's much harder to model the 50-year lifespan compared to what's this going to generate over the next 5 to 10 years to pay off the debt that we've taken on to build this thing, right? And so the idea is that you go, for example, if you're building a house, you go on a great street and you can undercapitalize or you can capitalize appropriately for that street to make the most of your investment. But if you're overcapitalized, the idea that someone's going to come pay you $5 million for your house on a street where every other house is worth $1 million is you're probably going to take a huge loss on that because it's not that kind of neighborhood, so to speak. I mean, I'm just throwing out numbers, right? But the principle that I'm trying to sort of explain is pretty much the same. And that's how property developers look at it. They don't look at investing in beauty for the sake of what's the word I'm looking at? Longevity.
Yeah.
They don't look of their investment.
So even this, right? This is worth nitpicking a little bit on grounds that this might be kind of an unhelpful comparison, but I'm going to say it because I find it really funny. There's shades of crypto in this, right? As follows: the only reason that this even can make financial sense, as opposed to, what I described as the far superior model where you're literally thinking centuries ahead, is because of the analog of exit liquidity, right? They're basically the people involved in these financial decisions who only care about, call it 3 to 5 years out. They know they'll be able to dump this, right? If they had to think, centuries is maybe a bit of a red herring, but if they had to think for, the rest of their lives, let's say, right, their entire involved, like if they were never going to sell it, basically, if they thought of it in more, I guess, fundamentally entrepreneurial terms, right? Like they're actually building something that they care about managing and they care about its contribution to its community and so on. The notion of these kinds of optimizations wouldn't really be relevant. So I would say, I mean, you obviously know more about this directly. I'm thinking about it in quite theoretical terms. So you can tell me if this is wrong, but I strongly suspect that the reason they're making these optimizations in terms of, backing out the revenue per square foot and all that kind of thing is because they know that this will be securitized. They know it will become liquid, and they know that the bulk of their actual return won't even be from monetizing the asset. It will be from selling it into a relatively liquid market on which it will be competing based on these metrics and certainly not on like beauty, for example.
Precisely. Yeah. What did you call it? Disintermediation is probably one of the driving forces. And it's it's really what led to the financial crisis of 2008.
Yeah, completely. Yeah,
right?
this is what we were talking about last time. This is financialization. Everything I've just described is the product. Well, what you can maybe split it out a little bit. One is financialization just in the sense of increasing sophistication in capital markets, which is, I think you have to be careful with it. We touched on this a few minutes ago too, that you have to be careful with complaining about, like falling into the trap of complaining about basically efficiency as opposed to incentives. And I think, in part one, I kind of started this little recurring joke more with myself than with you about the Marxist in the room who we're arguing with, even though they're not here. I think this is a very common tendency that, I don't know if it's Marxist necessarily, but I'm sure you'll be familiar with what I'm describing, for people to complain about what they would call capitalism. And they're criticizing exactly the things that we're criticizing now. And it's really unfortunate, because you can see why they think that, because this to them has always been packaged as capitalism.
As an essential part of a capitalistic system.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, it's worse than that. It's that this can't possibly be, it can't be disentangled. It's like, it is just the same thing.
Can I just add, the really unfortunate thing is that, and the reason why it sticks so hard to capitalism itself is because it really took hold just as the ideological battle was being fought, during the Cold War. Yeah. It took off and then accelerated once that battle was won in the 90s.
Yeah.
So that's why it sticks so hard, and it's almost, for many people, they can't distinguish between the two, and that many people don't want to either.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for it. Like, I understand why that misunderstanding would have come about. And so my point being that for us, we should, given we're, it's a bit arrogant, I suppose, but we're kind of declaring that we're aware of this, right? And we're trying to be more careful about it. Being careful in the language we're using so as to not throw the entire notion of capital markets and, relative efficiency in really any market, I suppose, like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like that's good, or at least not bad. It kind of, I'm not even sure it's good. It just is. It's like, if you have a market and it's genuinely free, this kind of thing will happen, right? People will innovate to generate higher returns and create more value, whatever. But disentangling that from the quintessentially fiat incentives, right? Like, sophistication in capital markets in and of itself has nothing to do with real estate monetizing. Like, I firmly believe that everything we've just described is maybe made, I guess you could argue something like the process is made smoother by the existence of these sophisticated tools. That's kind of unavoidably true, because, exactly as we've just described, they exist just to make the market more efficient, but they don't like make the market. The market is made by the incentives of the buyers and sellers, and that's what fiat corrupts. And these are completely different things. And it's unfortunate to conflate them, as almost every normie does. well,
it is, but I think depending on which sort of where you are on the ideological spectrum, you identify it in very different ways. For example, people on the left would look at the Cantillion Affect and say, this is capitalism, purely and corruptly. This is what it is. And people on the right will say, Blackstone getting free money to buy up all the houses is socialism, you see. Yeah. And but they're both recognizing a problem with the system that is inherently there. But they want to inject their ideology into the into the potential solution.
Well, our ideology is correct, obviously. So we're like we're not injecting anything.
I don't have an ideology.
We are scientifically identified. No,
we're following the science.
Yeah, exactly. We're following the science. We're trusting the science. Why would you not trust the science? I do want to emphasize that I have enormous sympathy, and I think it's extremely unfortunate that I'm not sure I'd even call it leftist, but in the terms you just used, that the leftist attitude exists because, for example, referring back to something we discussed at length in part one, if you are in a dead-end fiat job and you can barely pay your rent, and you realistically will never own any property. And on the back of that, you discussed this earlier this episode, maybe you're not even in a position to ever have kids, even though you'd like to. Like if that's that's the situation you've ended up in, you maybe don't have the luxury of these like armchair philosophizing, like, oh, but it's
my concerns
it's
are more
really the
practical
incentives,
and immediate.
Even though it is the science, right, and we are following the science. I think everyone should be more charitable towards the circumstances, and to a large, if not total extent, the interpretations that other people will have. And so that's maybe a nice way to tie a lot of this together, actually, that would be a phenomenal shift that Bitcoin could potentially enable, that you would start to unwind that whole thing. So if people can in fact save, then their attitude around their dead-end fiat job starts to shift in a healthier direction. Even if they don't immediately, it's not like you save some Bitcoin and then boom, you're rich and you buy a house, right? I think the more profound effect, this is actually something really interesting to get into. The more profound effect isn't that you become wealthy. It's that you start to think about your life in terms that even allow for wealth, right? So it's not like anything has, or not nothing, but it's not like a huge amount has changed in the moment. But again, it's that you're able to think about the future in a new way. And so maybe a lot of this unwinds on that basis, right? So you're still young, you haven't really accumulated much capital, but you can now save. So you start to think differently about real estate. You start to plan, how you might be able to buy a house if you even want to do that. Maybe you don't need to, I don't know. That then feeds healthily into having kids. And, at the end of all of this, maybe you're not such a communist anymore.
Well, no, I mean, I think
you identify, I'm being flippant, obviously, but you're in more of a position where it's fair to expect to have this kind of conversation.
I think we can safely assert a generalized aspiration that most people have is to start a family and buy a home, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that we present this as merely choices that you may or you may not is, it's an edge case. Most people want that, but they're not living in circumstances that will facilitate that. And the notion that you will own nothing and be happy is such a deeply offensive slogan.
I mean, I'm glad it's become a meme, though. I don't know how they don't
see that.
It's only us who say that anymore because it's such a ridiculous concept. So I actually really like that for what it's worth.
You like what?
I like that slogan. You'll own nothing and be happy. Well, I don't like the content of it, obviously,
I know what you mean.
But it's so absurd and it's actually original. Like Bitcoiners didn't come up with that. The WEF came up with it and we hijacked it. We repurposed it.
It's perfectly descriptive, but it's said like it's a command, which is one of the most dystopian and deeply sinister. That's what I find sinister about that slogan, is that it sounds like a command.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like,
it's kind of paternalistic, right? It's like,
highly,
it's as if they're talking to a toddler.
Yeah.
They think you're a toddler.
Authoritarian more than paternalistic. Like paternalistic, at least you would expect some kind of sympathetic motivation coming from someone who's paternalistic.
Well, no, but there is a sympathy. They're telling you you'll be happy. Actually, this is interesting.
Happy,
I don't think it is. I don't think it's authoritarian at all, because if it's authoritarian, there'd be no like HR massaging of it. It would just be telling you. Like it's a really subtle, insidious difference, I think. Like it's quite different from, say, an actually communist slogan, or even a fascist slogan, let's say, if you want to go back far enough. This is a very let's just say fiat, right? It's a very new or relatively historically new mode of political communication that I think is worse than authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is, at least, I don't know, I don't want to defend it exactly, but it tends to be more honest. It's like you could whatever the slogan is, it's kind of inviting you to more directly challenge it, whereas this is like manipulative. It's, you know.
So when I hear that slogan and when I say it, my emphasis on own nothing and you will be happy. Like it's a command, it's an order, and I find that really deeply sinister.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, sorry, I didn't pick up on
you
that
will own
before.
Nothing, and you will be happy.
I don't really hear it
like
that way. But I mean, there's no right answer because it was only ever written, right? Yeah. Nobody said it, but I hear it. I hear it as the way you talk to a toddler. It's like it's paternalistic. It's like it's not commanding you so much as I don't even know. I don't know the right words to use to describe this. It's in exactly the way that you would talk to a toddler. Rather than just giving an order, it's like nudging. That's maybe a good way of putting it. It's kind of giving you the illusion of choice, but maybe it is an order in some sense, I guess. Yeah, it's sort of telling you what to do, but making you feel as if you chose it when you didn't.
Well, that's the Slavoj Žižek. I don't know if you've heard it, where the authoritarian father versus the benevolent kind, pretending to be kind, where he says, you should go and visit your grandmother.
Yes, it is exactly this. That's how I read it, and it's I find that even creepier.
Yeah, and the kind father gives you the illusion of choice, but lays on the guilt that if you don't go, she's not feeling very well lately, that sort of thing. And so like you feel like you're doing it out of your own choice, but actually you've been driven by guilt. Whereas the authoritarian father says, go and visit your grandmother. I don't care if you enjoy it or not. Just put on your shoes, put your outfit on and just go and visit and do your duty.
See, I prefer that. If I have to pick an overlord, I'd rather they just tell me what to do and I know the rules.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting, yeah.
Maybe that's a very male perspective.
Probably.
We can laugh about this because of our privilege.
Yeah, I hate that word because I'm
just trying to trigger you.
No. I mean, I quite like doing that to other people. Yeah, I quite like doing that to other people because I'm ideologically ambiguous. And so some people, they get triggered with some of my socialist tendencies, and other people are triggered by my capitalist tendencies. And I'm like, actually, well, if you can't get a grip on that, I'm not talking to you directly, but the experiences I've had, I'm like, if you can't get a grip on that, that's fine, because that is who I am.
I'd go even further. I'm sure you'll approve of this, that regardless of what your political tendency is, whether in general or as applied to whatever it is you're talking about, and it has triggered you, you should be able to laugh about it, right? Like if you can't laugh at yourself, then something's gone wrong.
Well, this is what I think people get wrong in their approach to politics. Personal relationships are much more important than ideologies. And I think it's of great sadness to see and hear about more and more people becoming estranged from people that they love and should have lifelong bonds with, like family, friends, over political ideologies.
So I obviously completely, I know what you're talking about, but I would describe it slightly differently so as to try to address just how bad this is and why. And this, I'm going to describe this as if it's modern. I think that it's probably, it's human, so it's been around forever, but it feels like it's got a lot worse recently. So I think maybe people will feel as if it's a much more modern thing in the course of their experience over their life, that politics that encourage this are just fundamentally evil, almost regardless of what their political goal is. It's not, my point here isn't that it's...
Well, that's what cults do, right? They encourage you to become estranged from your social network and family, right?
Yeah. That's kind of funny because the most recent talk that I did is Bitcoin is a cult. We can come back to that if you want. But
no, this is a segue to
that. Just to finish that point though, because I at least in my in my lifetime, it does feel like a much more recent thing, and it's very, very sad. But I don't think that the reason I'm providing this emphasis is that it's also, it's not like spontaneous. It's not that, for example, not that you're arguing this, but one might argue, oh, the politics of the day, just are more fiery than they used to be. Like the issues are more serious and they're more divisive and whatever. And that's why people are more at each other's throats. Divisive is a good word to use here, actually, because the issues themselves are not divisive. Division is being pushed as part of the politics, and that's evil. Like I push it a little bit further. I'm wary of getting bogged down in like an individual issue, especially if it has nothing to do with Bitcoin. But there is this slogan, which I'm sure people will be familiar with, which is pretty. It makes the point slightly less effective, I think, because it's pretty universally like leftist, and American leftist in particular. You don't really hear this that much in Britain, but that the personal is the political, right? And to me, this is basically the most evil thing that you can say. It's like
how do you interpret that?
As the cause of exactly what you identified, as deliberately seeking to cause what you identified. I interpret it as an encouragement to essentially cult-like behavior, frankly, an encouragement to view your contribution to a political cause as more important than your personal relationships.
Oh, okay. I hadn't
That's obviously not how they articulate it, to be clear, because no one would, like, that sounds horrible. So that's not that's not good for recruitment if they do articulate it that way.
Misunderstand it,
but it's the effect.
Thought it's my personal circumstances and the way I experience the world might determine what my politics are. That's how. But I'm not too well versed with that.
I think it's close to that, but it's not that they do so much as that they should. Right? You're being encouraged to. When somebody says this is what I think is happening. When somebody says that line, they're saying to you, your personal circumstances ought to make you angrier in a way that can be channeled politically, which is obviously what they want. That's all they really care about. They don't care about you. And therefore, the sources, so they don't say this part, right? This is like my interpretation of it. The sources of your personal strife, whatever that is, ought to be interrogated politically. And for almost everyone, this will include their friends and their family and and all of their personal relationships. And so again, they obviously won't articulate it this way, but the both unavoidable and I think actually sneakily desired impact is cult-like. It's to instill, again, not even really so much the politics themselves, but like the way of thinking about politics that encourages you to value the political goals over your personal relationships.
I like the way you've laid that out, because my whole way of approaching politics, especially if I'm giving anybody advice, is the complete opposite of that.
Well, as it should be.
The way I view it is in the sense that, if one person has a problem and we're talking about their problem, I only talk about things that they can personally take responsibility for. But if we're talking about, like, if 5 million people have that problem, I totally believe that that's an issue of failed policy. It's not that 5 million people are suddenly lazy or suddenly dysfunctional or whatever. I think that's a complete failure of policy and something structural within society. What I object to deeply is people taking refuge in bad policy to excuse their own lack of agency, right? Lack of trying. You've got to try. How have you tried to improve your personal life? That has to be the starting point for everybody, but it cannot be an excuse for bad government policy or no government policy, and vice versa. You can't take refuge. You can't excuse your own personal failings.
I could push this even further in kind of an amusing direction, just to, this might be forcing it a little bit, but to tie it back like literally to Bitcoin again, that so to make this point, there's some pretty big assumptions you have to just believe. So like, bear with me. I can see why people would object to this. Politics, at all is effectively organized violence, right? It's, whether that's, I don't even mean that in like I don't mean for that to be unflattering. I mean for it to just be accurate, right? Any political process is one that either couldn't be in fact, or in the minds of those involved shouldn't be resolved peacefully, right? Because if people just cooperated, then there's kind of I was gonna say there's no need for politics. There isn't politics if people are just cooperating. So with that, and obviously people can object to that, but I just think it's obviously true, not good or bad. It just is the way things are. And so from that starting point, you wonder, and I'm kind of doing my best to tie in exactly what you just said, but please rebut this if you don't think I'm capturing it accurately, or if you think it doesn't, I think it's contradictory. From that starting point, when are you most able to interact freely and cooperate and avoid the urge to, quote unquote, solve problems or achieve goals, let's say, with organized violence? It's when you're secure, you're hopeful, you're able to think about the future and have resources you don't immediately need to consume. And obviously the opposite of that is if you're structurally unable to think about the long term. Again, I said all this stuff in part 1. You become selfish and desperate and antisocial, and politics starts to look a lot more appealing. Like, why would you bother cooperating with people when every attempt at cooperation just screws you? So I think there's a really deep connection here that I think my hunch would be that most Bitcoiners they maybe wouldn't have articulated it the way that I just did, but they're pretty keenly aware of this. But again, this is why I have a lot of sympathy for people who, you might think on the face of it have like completely different politics from me or something like that. But again, what I wanted to bring it back to is exactly what you started with, which I think is really important, that you should always start by focusing on the personal. And for somebody in that situation, obviously we're going to disagree about why this is the case, but I'd even argue, I mean, this might come across as kind of almost obnoxious or something, but I have as much, if not more, sympathy than they do for themselves, because, I mean, assuming I'm right, obviously, but because I feel like I have actually identified why they are in that situation, whereas for them, they almost can't. Their refuge is politics because they don't have the space to think about this stuff, and so they're just nudged towards participating in organized violence rather than cooperation. And so that is why it's trying to tick off a few different threads here. That's why the personal is political is, again, I really just believe this is evil. Like as a slogan or as an impulse or whatever, it's deliberately, not only is it driving people in that direction, it's taking advantage of people who are in that situation to ultimately just make their situation even worse, or certainly make the aggregate situation worse. Because politics is, I guess, assuming you agree with that starting point of it's organized violence is how you achieve things that you can't achieve peacefully. It's necessarily negative sum. So it's basically pushing people who have already been made desperate and antisocial by forces completely beyond their control, that it's not really fair in some sense to ascribe them responsibility for. It's like preventing them escaping. Yeah. It's pushing them even further into this, for the promise of, it's very cult-like, basically. I completely agree with that description of it. It's like pushing them towards their own gain.
Let's use that as a cue for what I've been meaning to ask you.
But is Bitcoin in fact a cult?
Bitcoin is a cult, so you say.
Yeah.
Explain, Alan.
I don't think Bitcoin is a cult, but I had a lot of fun with this talk. which I did at a conference just the other week, and I might recycle it because I got a lot of. I think people liked it, and people, afterwards were chatting about their experience with this, and they gave me a bunch of new ideas, so I could actually probably give the talk in quite a different way, like the updated version of it. So it's a joke, right? It's like the whole premise of the talk.
But let's take it seriously.
But this is kind of the way that I delivered it was like, I said something on this recording maybe 10 minutes ago or so that I also said in this talk, which is like, you need to be able to laugh at yourself, right? It's regardless of what you're talking about or what the issue is. If you can't laugh at yourself, something's kind of gone wrong. And I was sort of weaving that throughout, like, it's probably healthy if we can critically analyze whether or not we're in a cult and laugh about it. Probably means we're not in a cult, because that's not what cults do, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of these things which I think is funny because it's true that there is like a lot of cult-like elements in Bitcoin that it's worth laughing about, it's worth reflecting on for the sake of, your mental health, I guess. So
give us a rundown of what you identify as sort of cult-like.
I'll see if I can think of like the top contenders. There's the
vernacular, the memes.
Yeah, the vernacular, the fact that you have to. So I basically, in this talk, I looked up like classic. This is the whole structure of the talk. It's like classic characteristics of a cult, and I just went through them one by one. Some of them weren't really that compelling, but unfortunately some of them were. So like, yeah, the vernacular is a big one. The fact that there's a huge amount of terminology you have to learn to participate in the discussion, which is both a burden on you and a means of exclusion of outsiders, because you simply can't, like, they have no idea what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a filter and a qualifier. Yeah, and when you're on the inside, it helps you bond.
Yeah. Another one that is quite compelling is apocalyptic and or utopian beliefs, right? So fiat's melting ice cube and hyperbitcoinization, right? Yeah, you gotta get in before it's too late. That doesn't even really need any explanation, I don't think. Manipulative recruitment. That's an interesting one.
Oh, you think so?
No, I don't think any of this, but I think it's worth.
Have you observed manipulative techniques?
Okay, so this is a good.
Pressure techniques.
See, you're being critical, then that's helpful. So it also worth saying, by the way, when I did the talk, I went through all these characteristics, kind of jokingly making the argument they're true, but then I went through them again being like, well, actually, if you think about it, it's not really. So on manipulative recruitment, the argument that it is manipulative is not so much in terms of, well, I'll do it the other way around. It's probably easier because you've already identified this. I don't think it really counts as manipulative because as you say, I have never seen or never, witnessed, been part of exploiting the recruited, right? Or it really, and I think this is actually disqualifying that the typically, at least, the people doing the recruitment don't actually gain anything from it. They're doing it, out of the goodness of their hearts or something to that effect. So I think that does cast a lot of doubt on it. But nonetheless, it's not that difficult to characterize it as manipulative when it's like number go up, right? It's generational wealth.
Yeah.
Like that's it's like,
I look at manipulative as being somewhat deceitful, or
that is pretty deceitful
through pressure and coercion.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no pressure or coercion really. And that is a point I made later on. I don't think it was about the recruitment point. It was about something else. I don't remember all the names of all the characteristics, but I think if you push a bit further on, what are the means of getting people into the Bitcoin cult, they typically consist of education, which is actually really difficult to cast in any kind of negative light, because it's like you got to read these 20 books and you got to think about these 10 kind of related but nonetheless distinct topics, and like go away and do your own little personal PhD, and then come back and you still know nothing. So like that's not really.
I look at it, the cultish behavior.
Good, basically,
it's the groupthink that I look at.
Groupthink's a big one. Yeah.
Groupthink is probably the dominant one, because all the others I can find quite a lot of holes in, but the groupthink is extremely strong.
So, but I don't even believe that. Like it's this is why I think this is healthy to go through all this, right? Because it is quite.
There are factions within the cult
too. yeah. But okay, but here's the thing, right? There's obviously a lot of groupthink, but if you contextualize it, I think it's actually quite revealing in that the groupthink typically only pertains to Bitcoin itself. And even there, as you say, there's factions, right? Whereas you can challenge this is like unavoidably anecdotal, right? But as a demographic, Bitcoiners are, in my experience, and I think, again, anecdotally, but I think in almost everybody's experience, Bitcoiners are the most open-minded group that you can identify in that way. Not like every single one of them, but as in the average Bitcoiner, if you went to some other collection of people, like some other, way of identifying a group, and you just pick someone and you gauged how open-minded they are about literally anything, I think Bitcoiners are gonna score very, very well.
I wonder, because my experience with people in general and sort of subcultures is that most subcultures have a rather high opinion of themselves.
Oh, obviously, yeah, that's intrinsic. But that's why I said about anything other than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
But I think the reason is quite interesting too, and this is very, very different to an actual cult. It's almost the opposite of an actual cult. That most people aren't in fact recruited. They kind of self-report for their cult duty on the basis of being almost, I don't know if you can be unhealthily open-minded, but like extremely cynical and skeptical about everything and requiring to think everything through from first principles. And hence they, for example, probably the most common path is they had some background either in finance or in like economics, more in an academic context. And we talked about this last time, right? They're just like, this makes no sense. And the more, rather than just accepting it and like getting along with their day, they dig and they dig and they dig and they eventually find Bitcoin. And then they self-report for the cult. And then that's, okay, yeah, they tend to be pretty dogmatic about Bitcoin things, but they're highly predisposed to, just completely in general, they're highly predisposed to skepticism and attempting to think things through from first principles, which makes them very open-minded about everything else. They're in the cult because of how open-minded they are.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps that you come in looking for a solution to a problem, and whether you stumble upon it through number go up. I put my hand up. That was me. But I found a solution to a problem I had no answers for, and not only that, I was actually miseducated. Right. Which prevented me from seeing what the solution was.
Just very quickly, do you know who Alex Svetsky is?
Oh, we've met.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we've met once.
I'm only bringing that up because I want to credit him, because he was the one who told me this great line, that for him at least, but I think for a lot of people, and I think actually probably for you too, right? You came for the money and you stayed for the money.
Yeah, fair.
Speaking of dogma and memes.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I got to build this brand, and it gives me the opportunity to have conversations with, I guess, the people I consider to be the most interesting in the space. And so I'm grateful to that. So maybe what I perceive on the timeline and then the people that I meet is quite a different experience. Yeah. Like the culture on the timeline, I'm not.
Twitter's not real though. You gotta keep telling yourself.
It kind of is.
Well, yeah, I know it kind of is, but
you know what I mean. I know what you're saying.
I think, yeah, the what would you call it? The merits of even that is a meme, right? Like Twitter isn't real life, is a meme.
Yeah.
The merits of the meme is it's not to be interpreted in absolute terms. It's not Twitter doesn't matter at all and is fake. It's a counter to what can seem very compelling when you're on the inside. They're like, whoa, this is everything. This is the entirety of reality. But as we know, we were talking about this the other day, right? That that's what's so nice about, and there's a bit of like a cult element to this too. That's what's so nice about meetups and I would say good conferences. Probably this is a very good conference. Not every conference is a good conference. It forces the what often starts, and almost always starts, as Twitter discussions and Twitter-based relationships into real life. And it's like, this is also a meme, right? This is like a classic experience that people have where they spend all their time yelling at someone online, like they have a nemesis on Bitcoin Twitter, and then they meet in real life and you're like, oh, you're like actually kind of a nice guy.
and that's the real contrast. Is like online, it's very adversarial.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of tension. People are jumping all over each other. And you meet, I haven't been to many conferences. I don't like them, but I've been to a few to film this podcast. And the air is just so relaxed. People are so friendly. People are quite calm and charming even though
they're manipulating you. They're trying to get you into the cult.
I'm already in. I'm all in.
But there's fear and guilt tactics to keep you in. So you got to be...
Go on, okay. Oh, you mean like ostracizing?
I'm just running through the other characteristics. They're coming back to me now. That's apparently, I'm not in a cult, so I wouldn't know, but that's a classic fear and guilt to keep you in. Charismatic leaders, that's a big one. I forgot about that before.
I was about to say that. I think, the easy one to point to is Michael. Michael Saylor is obviously quite a very prominent person in the space, but there are so many...
Satoshi.
Exactly. There are so many...
Practically a religious figure.
Well, Satoshi's kind of like this mythical figure that doesn't exist, and we have his writings, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's kind of like
you can't even say it without laughing. It's so creepy.
Yeah. But he seems like
have you read the sacred texts? Have you memorized them?
People quote Satoshi's writings like scripture.
Yeah, of course.
They're having an argument about some kind of bit, and they're like,
they appeal to Satoshi.
It isn't an appeal to Satoshi. And I can't remember who it was, but someone said, who cares what he said? That was 16 years ago. Everything's changed since then.
That's a cancelable offense.
Yeah. It's like, well, actually,
you're
Satoshi
right, the church.
But I do like the references to the early discussions, because even Hal Finney a lot of people who were lamenting suit coiners, so to speak, and institutions coming into the space, and this was always on the cards. What did you think was going to happen? That Larry Fink was going to carry $100 billion in his hardware wallet and pocket? What did you think was going to happen? What did you think?
There is a lot of that as Bitcoin gets more and more normalized. What did you...
Yeah.
How could this have gone any differently?
Alan, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I invited you to come onto my podcast.
Part three.
Yeah, that's what because I still haven't actually asked you what I wanted to talk to you about in the first instance.
The 3.5 hour long preamble.
I'm like, let's just get to know him and see. We've touched on some really interesting topics and highly relevant topics that are not only germane to Bitcoin, but also you as a person within Bitcoin as well. But I feel like... what you're really well known for is Bitcoin is Venice, and I love that title. It's a beautifully evocative title.
Thank you.
And
that's the goal, because it doesn't really mean anything.
Well, it does mean so many things, and depending on the angle at which you come to it with, it means
my PR
so many different things. I really love it.
Can you be my hype man?
The first time because I don't know, you probably don't know this, but writing is a deep passion of mine that I discovered quite late in life that, I could never have guessed I would enjoy so much. And Bitcoin is Venice is such a beautifully evocative title that I wanted to invite you specifically with almost the sole purpose of, and we just never got to it. So my invitation to you is, we have a London studio. You are in Edinburgh, beautiful Edinburgh, but whenever you're in town, please pop by, and I'd love to film and record part 3 with you. And we will talk about Bitcoin is Venice.
Allegedly. We'll see, maybe.
Alan Farrington, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, man.
Likewise.